After the bye week, the Steelers get a win. Tim Benz, Mark Madden, Madden Benz, Unfiltered. Steelers fans, for you got two games for the price of one. There was the game in the first half where the Steelers looked every bit like the team that meandered its way through the first 5 weeks. And then in the second half, you looked like a team that, well, might find its way to the playoffs after all. Mark, let's start with what the Steelers did better after halftime against Los Angeles. What was the biggest storyline for you in that regard?
Well, obviously, it was all Mike Tomlin's coaching. At least that's what I heard on ESPN this morning about how they're Tomlining and they're winning games they have no right to win because of Mike Tomlin. But the bottom line is that TJ Watt turned the game around with that pick. TJ Watt has won 2 games, the Cleveland game and this game. And even though he only had the pick, no sacks, awful quiet otherwise, he might be the Steelers' MVP on defense and MVP on offense. He does more to create points than half the guys on the offensive side of the ball. So that's where the game was won. That gave the Steelers offense a very short field, just 7 yards. They scored, they seized momentum. And after that, the offense did play good, but we keep going nuts because of Kenny Pickett's occasional fourth quarter explosions. Amazing stat I just read, the Cavalli put on Twitter. 14 first quarter possessions for the Steelers this year, 10 3 and outs. You're allowed to win the game in the first quarter, too. You're allowed to play well in the first quarter. So they say that the numbers don't lie. Okay, the Steelers have been outscored by, I think it's 27 points on the season. They've been outgained by 660 yards on the season. They've been outgained in every game this season. So either those numbers are lying or the Steelers' 4-2 record is. And I got a pretty good idea which I think are lying.
Well, we were talking on the podcast, Mark, about, how good do we think this team really is? Are they mediocre? Are they a little above that? Are they a little below that? And somebody who listened to that podcast sent me a tweet and said, did it ever occur to you guys that the entire league might be mediocre? And my answer to that is yes. It occurs to me every time I watch the NFL. I realize that. And it's always been that case with the Steelers. Like, that's why it was important for them to get to 10-7 versus 9-8, because then you're just that one slice above that gets you to keep playing for one more week.
Yeah, but that might be all it does is get you playing for one more week. Then again, what if you play one of the other overachieving mediocre teams in the first round? I think there's only 4 or 5 good teams in the NFL, and maybe not even that. And there might only be 8 or 10 good quarterbacks in the NFL, and maybe not even that. So, yeah, things are wide open. If Steeler fans want to seek hope in that, they're absolutely justified in doing so.
I think they're going to see exactly one of those teams in Jacksonville, a team that forecasted to be exactly so, in the sense that a lot of us thought they'd be a 10-11 win team. That's where I had them pegged. They got 5 wins already. And the reason I had them there is because the division in which they play. Now, it took them a little while to get this far. They're 5-2 now after dropping 2 of their first 3. But this is the exact kind of team that you just described, Mark, where maybe if the Steelers get in at, say, like a 6 or a 7 seed, they get a Jacksonville at a 2 or a 3 because they went a crappy South.
Well, let's beat Jacksonville next week first. And that's a winnable game for the Steelers, although I do count Trevor Lawrence among the legitimately good quarterbacks in the NFL. I think he's good and getting better. I think his ceiling is, well, needless to say, much higher than Kenny Pickett's.
Well, he's been the last 4 weeks. I looked it up. His passer ratings between 91 and 105 the last 4 weeks. And he only has 1 interception.
That's very consistent.
Yeah, only
Kenny
1
Pickett
interception.
was over 90 yesterday. I think that's just the 3rd time in his career, if I'm not mistaken. And by the way, a correction, Tim. Steelers minus 24 in point differential this season, which ain't good. But yeah, I think Jacksonville at home at Acrisure is nonetheless a winnable game, and the Steelers would be well served to win it and build a cushion. I don't think they're the type of team that's going to rally at the end. Then again, the last couple of years, they've made a habit of exactly that.
They're 1.5 point underdogs this week right now. The Steelers are the over-under.
Are they really?
Yeah, it was 1 last night. Now it's 1.5.
That surprises me a little after the way they, well, I was going to say the way they played yesterday, but frankly, they only played good for 1 quarter, and that's it.
Yeah, and you know what? Actually, Jacksonville's game, I'm probably overgeneralizing by saying this, but it was somewhat similar to Pittsburgh's. I mean, they had one either defensive touchdown or set up by a defensive touchdown, just like Pittsburgh did. That's another storyline we can get to, Mark, is when they got in the red zone, at least they converted. They hadn't had many opportunities to do that. I think they only had 21 plays the entirety of the season in the red zone, 7 trips, and they cashed in when they got there, which was encouraging to see, albeit a total gift from Watt on the defensive side.
And how about 3 rushing touchdowns after no rushing touchdowns to this point in the season?
I thought that was Ciamalu's best game. I thought that was the best game for the interior 3 of the offensive line.
Well, it's about time.
Yes.
It's funny because people now want, as they do every week for whatever reason, to supplant Harris with Warren as the running back. Warren had some good stats. Some good runs at the end. But Harris had the better stats, but neither had great stats. I still don't like the running game despite the 3 rushing touchdowns. And, 3.9 average for Harris, 3.6 for Warren. They got to do better than that. I like the Pickett quarterback sneak, although the one quarterback sneak, Tim, on 4th and 1 that ended the game, basically, he did not make it. It's a shame for
McVay.
Yeah, the Rams, that they couldn't review the call based on a kind of quirk in the rules, a hole in the rules, but that's how it went. But I don't think he made it. Did you?
No, I don't think he made it. And I wonder if that's something that the NFL will look at. If there's not another snap before the 2-minute warning, if you still have a chance, the booth review can then kick in. I wonder if they'll do that.
I don't know if you change.
I don't think they should. I'm like you said on the podcast. I think replay has gotten too involved.
There's too many rules. There's too many rules, and replay is too pervasive. And I don't think at any rate you change a rule based on one instance, based on an outline.
Right, and they tend to do that. That's kind of what happened with the pass interference thing a few years ago when they decided to review pass interference for a while. They reacted to the Rams-Saints playoff game, and that backfired.
If they change rules after the fact, Tim, then we need to go back and Liverpool beats Tottenham.
That's why you're so angry at Tottenham. You kept taking shots.
That's our only loss, Tim. If it wasn't for that loss, would be top of the Premiership.
What do you think about the prospect of them trying to put a Super Bowl in London, by the way, since we brought up soccer here for a second and played at one of those stadiums?
I think it's a bigger possibility that Jacksonville moves to London.
Yeah, I wonder how that would work with the divisions and everything. But that Super Bowl idea, everybody thinks, it's easy. It's just one game. What are they going to do? Start the game at 11 o'clock local time or start the game at 8 o'clock local time and have it start at 3:30 on the East Coast? I'm all for a 3:30 Super Bowl, but I don't think the networks would be.
Tim, I think it would be good if they played it at Tottenham Stadium because then someone there will actually have won something.
I don't know if it'll be Jacksonville. They might have to go through the Steelers again to do it. How would that be if they got home field advantage in a London Super Bowl? That would be perfect.
John Kahn would love that, boy.
Hey, regarding where they are in the North, let's forget about the AFC overall, talking about playoff positioning. What about the North? Every team is 500 or better. I think that's the only division in football where that's the case right now. Is that a matter of mediocrity finding itself within the division, or is the division actually better than most?
But by the way, Tim, how about today on ESPN, Orlovsky was saying that the Browns need to go get Kirk Cousins. Oh. Right, because that wouldn't cause any cap problems, and Deshaun Watson wouldn't react badly to that.
Oh, that would be beautiful.
The division.
We need that chaos.
The division. And by the way, I want to note, the Steelers season this year, and maybe it'll play out this way, is going a lot like the Vikings last year, where they're getting blown out X amount of times, but they're winning all the one-score games. And you can't do that forever, but Minnesota proved you can do that for a season. So maybe the Steelers are in with the shot for the division. I don't think the division is anything better than mediocre. I don't think any of the teams are anything better than mediocre. We tend to overreact based on how, Baltimore played this week, and they were great, killing Detroit. But you seem to think 3 teams can make it out of that division. I wouldn't be surprised if only 1 does.
I think 3 can. I think 2 probably will. I'm almost assured that 2 teams will get in from the East. The Dolphins.
If everybody goes 9-8, though, which they could.
Yeah, that if everybody goes 9-8, I don't know who from the West or the South beats them. It would take a tiebreaker from one of those teams.
Maybe.
The likelihood is that at least one team will be 10-7, like the Bengals were 2 years ago. And then maybe you sneak in with 2 9-8 teams because they've got better conference records.
Maybe the Patriots rally and grab a playoff spot.
Oh, my God.
How about them beating the Bills?
Yeah,
Okay,
I didn't see that coming at all.
I'm wondering if the Bills, against all logic, if their window's closed.
Oh, I think it is.
They don't look good. And they're one of those teams I'm talking about. They're not one of the 4 or 5 good teams. They're a slightly above average team. I do feel bad for Josh Allen, though, because I don't think any of what's gone wrong is his fault.
I thought coming into the season, the Bills would be a team that we would look at and say, well, they started to backslide in 2023. That's how I projected them. I just wasn't sure who of the other 3 from the East would separate. It appears that the Dolphins have, but the Dolphins, if they have separated, they still haven't separated to the point that they're better than the Eagles. How about the monologue that their head coach, Sirianni, went on about the tush push after that game? I don't know if you saw it, Mark, but he was literally pointing at he cut a promo on the NFL saying that they want to ban the tush push.
Has the NFL said that, or is that just media speculation?
They've been non-committal about whether or not they want to keep it in the game. So people are assuming.
I don't see how you can legislate out something that's legal and works. And other teams try to do it, and this, I think, was Sirianni's point, although I kind of Z'd out, is that they do it better. And one reason they do it better is because Jalen Hurts is a very powerfully built quarterback. And his leg drive on that play, I don't think can be matched by too many of his peers.
Similar for what Kelsey is at center, too.
Yeah, exactly. So I don't think they should outlaw it. I think that would be, I don't even know what word I could use to describe. It would be prejudicial against one team. And I don't think that's any way to alter your rule book.
Do you think that Pickett is getting more involved at the line of scrimmage in the second half of games? And is that part of the reason why they're starting to succeed?
I don't know. I don't care. I hate this endless Matt Canada debate, which, this is tied into. He's 4-2 just like everybody else on the team. I mean, let's give that a rest for a week anyway.
I thought Deontay Johnson's return was a huge storyline because not only did he chip in nicely with 5 catches and 79 yards, I thought Tomlin was accurate in his post-game assessment that his presence made the Rams be more honest by guarding other people besides just George Pickens. And that allowed Pickens
for sure true. I never figured Johnson's value, in terms of just what he means for everybody else, how he opens the field, until he didn't play. The Steelers' offense looked totally different. So many more options. Not just one guy, but other options opened up because of Deontay's presence. So full marks to him on his return. I got to tell you, though, 2 things bugged me a lot about that game. I'm not quite ready to throw roses in the path of George Pickens yet in terms of him having arrived as this elite receiver. Couple reasons. One, did you see the catch he totally chickened out of yesterday?
Yeah, he short-armed one. When the
totally chickened out. Okay?
Especially because it was that safety that he knocked out earlier in the game that was closing in on him.
Right. He chickened out, and the 2 unsportsmanlike flags, coupled with the one Deontay took. What are those guys, 10 years old? You're trying to win a game. You have accountability to the 51 other guys on the roster. That's just idiotic, and there's no accountability. Do you think they'll even take a stern word from anybody, whether a leader or a coach, because of that? Because I don't think so.
Well, they'd have to hear it first.
What do you mean?
I don't think anybody's going to give them a stern word.
That's my point.
Yeah,
that's my point. Ain't nobody going to say nothing. It's just la-di-da.
I'd rather say woe than sickum thing that Tomlin always defaults to. That's not a woe than sickum scenario. That's a pull your head out of your ass scenario. Whenever
I hear the woe than sickum thing, Tim, I make a gesture just off camera with my right hand that's pretty familiar.
That's one thing to say about the block. The 2 taunts afterwards have nothing to do with saying whoa. That's saying less. Say less. Don't say whoa. Go back to the huddle.
Yeah, I couldn't agree more. And that's why I don't yet quite buy into George Pickens, because stuff like that shows signs of him going down the AB path. Now, if he posts the AB stats before that, fine. But I'd like to see him win more playoff games than AB too.
What'd you think of Penguins versus Blues and where they are right now?
They play Dallas, Colorado, and Ottawa at home this week, all games in PPG, but they're all pretty good teams. Dallas and Colorado are real good. Ottawa's up and coming, we think. The season could get away from them in a hurry the way they're playing. They were just absolutely poor at St. Louis.
I look at the power play, and it still leaves me scratching my head as to whether or not it's going to be a finished product by the end of the season, or if we're going to be agitated about what it could and should be all year long.
Tim, I look at the power play and I need an EKG. It's a finished product right now. It is what it's going to be because they have no desire to change anything. Here's the most amazing thing about that power play. They brought in the best power play point man of his generation, Erik Karlsson, right? And instead of letting him dictate, they have jammed him into their same old crappy power play, and they're doing things exactly the same way.
Do we see Nedeljkovic sometime during this 3-game homestand?
I think we probably do. Maybe
yeah. I'm sorry. Yeah, go ahead.
Maybe it's based on how good Jari plays until then. If he plays good or bad the first game against Dallas, whatever, on Tuesday, tomorrow. But I don't think Jari's lost these games. I don't think he's stolen any so far this year, but I think he is exactly what I expected him to be. I don't know what they expected at that inflated price tag, but I don't have a problem with how he's played.
How you feeling about how some of the new guys are being threaded in besides Karlsson? Guys like Graves, the bottom 6, etc.
Karlsson's been great. Riley Smith's been great. Graves has been pretty good. The bottom 6 has been just another typically bad Penguins bottom 6. Rob Rossi made a good point when he said, how long have they always had this great top 6? And when there's a hole in the top 6, they go out and get somebody like a Raquel or a Smith, and the top 6 don't miss a beat. And they can't get together a legitimate third line, which should be much easier.
Well, then you're still trying to find 6 quality guys that can play for cheap as opposed to one who can play for mid-range salary.
Tim, a lot of other teams do that.
No, that's fair.
A lot of other teams have drafted better at that level, too.
Well, that's part of it.
A lot of other teams would have long since, and I would have, by the way, given a chance on the bottom 6 to a guy like Sam Poulin.
Yeah, a lot of other teams draft and develop their own players, and when they have some mediocrity in the farm system, that mediocrity is at least mediocre on the NHL level, too. They don't even have that in the farm system right now.
Yeah, I'm curious to see what Kyle Dubas does if things keep going south here.
Do you think that'll be his next step?
Whether he says to Sullivan, listen, you got to change this or that, put Karlsson more prominent on the power play, put Sid on the right half wall. I don't know what he's going to do. And as far as the movement goes, I mean, Rutherford would have made a trade by now, probably. So I when we talk about, we don't know if Dubas is reactionary, he could possibly be more reactionary than Jim was.
Yeah, I mean, that's part of it, Mark, is that they don't have those guys in the system because they always use those guys that they do have in the system or the picks that would become that to get Jason Zucker or guys of that
exactly.
Raquel,
Another time when they filled a top 6 role seamlessly.
Before we get to the go ahead, I'm sorry.
One thing about the Penguins I want to say is that the problems, it's easy to blame Sullivan, and perhaps he's hit his expiration date here. But he's not going to leave because the old guard, the core of 3, has no desire to break in a new coach on their tenure. Their declining years. But it's the players who are stubborn too. This team doesn't see itself as it is. It's an older, not slow team, but slower team. And they want to play like they did in 16 and 17, and they can't do it. The only team they've outskated so far this year is Washington, who have aged worse and are even slower. The power play is just, this is the way we do it. It's very, you know what they're doing, Tim? They're Tomlining. The Penguins' power play is Tomlining.
Tell Greeny he could actually weave hockey into this show if he wants to.
No, ESPN's obviously not going to weave hockey into any of the 6 hours of nonstop yelling and mugging. But yeah, it's just, they think they're right. And let me tell you, I've said to people in that locker room, I've had guys say, because I always complain about the power play, even to them in conversation, right? And they say, do you think you know more about the power play than us? They say, absolutely. And in this case, I do. My power play would be better than theirs.
Real quick, Mark, before we get to the comments, do you think that Pick got jobbed on that slide, or is that karma for what Pickett did?
It was a close call, right?
It was a close call. I mean, I'm kidding a little bit, but it is funny that it's Wake Forest and a slide that's in debate after what Pickett did.
I think probably they got it just right. It was so borderline. But the problem is with Dunsky, And that's how we should pronounce his name, Tim. Not Value or Valaire, but Dunsky. If he just runs straight ahead out of bounds, which he could have easily done, and make the sticks, the game's over. He doesn't need to keep the clock running, which I believe was his intent in sliding, don't you?
Yeah, unless he was trying to just avoid getting popped at the sideline. But that if that was the easier play, then you got to take
on the line,
hit.
kid. Get popped.
Yeah, well, I don't know. I can't read his mind on it, but
that's what? He's another typical pit punk. That was a pit punk play.
Let's go to the comments. I'll start at the bottom here and work my way up, perhaps. Pete says 2023 Steelers, best team ever.
I disagree. The Steelers that started at 11-0 were the worst best team ever.
There you go. Yeah. Let's go to Sean, who says Sullivan has wasted the twilight of Crosby, Malkin, and Letang's careers, and Jari ain't that guy.
Okay, first off, if anybody's wasted the twilight of their careers, it's Crosby, Malkin, and Letang themselves by being stubborn and resisting change. Okay, and what did you expect anyway when they got older? I don't think anybody's wasted anything. I just think nobody wins Stanley Cups after a certain age, Tim. Everybody peaks in their early to mid-20s. The Penguins actually got a couple cups later in the tenure of those three guys, if you think about it.
I was just about to say that.
Of the league.
That was my point. That's the point I was going to make, is they actually did better sort of in the back third of their careers than they did in the middle. When I think about wasting, I think about blowing series leads over and over again between 2010 and 2016.
I think about 2013. When they lost to Boston in the conference final 4 straight.
Yeah.
If they would have left well enough alone with the roster adjustment, or if they would have made those adjustments and Crosby would have played with Iginla, they had a real good chance to win a Stanley Cup that year. That was the most wasted year. But you see guys like that dope a few seconds ago on, with the question, one thing they don't get, they wanted their precious 3 core to stay together, but they don't get the shortcomings of it. If they would have traded Malkin in 2018, like I suggested then they should, to get like Barkov in a first rounder and maybe another NHL player, they'd be loaded right now, or comparatively loaded. But instead, they kept the gang of 3 together, and that's okay. I understand that, don't have a problem with it, but it wasn't going to lead to any kind of Indian summer of winning.
Bill says, if the Penguins are out of a playoff spot at Thanksgiving, should Sullivan and Reardon lose their jobs at that point?
Should they? It's not going to happen. And again, we have Matt Canada syndrome here. We're blaming Reardon for the power play. The problems with the power play are on those involved, because this is exactly what they want. Okay. Do you think Reardon's telling them to never shoot? No, am I right, Tim?
No, you're exactly right. I mean, like the Stars run that. If the Stars don't run the whole team, period, they're definitely running the power play.
Right, because they're the guys who were out there. Like, you don't call plays like in football.
And if it was successful, then I wouldn't bitch about it. But it's not as successful as it could be.
That stuff where they look for the perfect finish, it works just enough that they're still convinced.
Yeah.
But no, they ain't losing their jobs. The gang of 3 has no desire to break in a new coach. Sullivan will be the coach as long as those 3 are there, unless I've totally misread the situation.
Truth is, as much as FSG, this is Richard. Truth is, as much as FSG may like Sullivan, his adverseness to change may cost him his job, especially as Dubas wasn't the one who hired him.
You're assuming that Dubas has hire and fire. You're assuming that Dubas has hire and fire power over Sullivan. I'm not sure he does.
Maybe that's why he was so blunt in talking about how much he loves Sullivan from the outset.
Yeah, I mean, and Sully's a great coach. I just think maybe he's hit his expiration date. Maybe. I'll tell you what I didn't like, though. After that game in St. Louis, Sully talked about having to work harder. We didn't go hard enough. That's what a coach says when he doesn't know what to do.
Yeah, all hockey coaches tend to default to that because they don't have better answers. In fact, I think football coaches are starting to do that now. Tomlin did that with the whole mojo thing a couple weeks ago.
No, Tim, that's not true. He's just Tomlining.
Russ says Warren has better quickness, vision, and explosiveness. Takes Najee too long to get going, and he seems unsure of where to go if the hole closes. Moose Johnston during the color commentary in the first quarter did a good job of showing a hole that Najee completely missed when he tried to bounce it outside. Yep.
First quarter, it was 2nd and 4, and if he goes to a hole that was there, okay, small hole, but if he settles for like 3 yards, he's close to the sticks, right?
And then he lost yardage.
Bounced it outside and lost 5. And that's amazing that Najee Harris has been a running back since he's a little kid and still really doesn't know how to do it. But that said, I mean, Harris had better stats than Warren. He just did.
I was surprised that the impact of the two running backs for the Rams didn't carry forward through the game more, Mark. Like those two guys that they just called up or called off the street, getting 60 yards apiece, even the scramble by Stafford, them getting 138 yards. If you had told me that in advance, I said there's no way the Steelers win.
I think the Rams should have won the game. I think the Steelers got lucky. The Watt thing just was a cataclysmic turnaround.
Not to mention 2 missed kicks. Well, 3. They made up for one of them with a 2-pointer, but 2 missed kicks and 2 drops from Kupp as well.
Yeah, they missed, 2 field goals and an extra point, right?
Yeah, they made up for the extra point with a 2-point conversion, but the 2 missed field goals were huge.
If I were an NFL coach, I'd go for 2 every time. What's the percentage of 2-point conversions made, Tim?
I don't know. I would guess it's probably about 50, 53.
Okay, well, if you do it all the time, you're probably going to convert slightly more, just by habit, right? Let's say you can convert 60% of the time. I'm no math major, Tim, but that sounds to me like 20% more points.
60% of the time, it works every time. Brian Lucas says, why don't they do the tush push? I think Mark and I talked about that earlier. Nobody does it quite as well as the Eagles do.
Yeah, they have, like you said, Kelsey and Hurts.
Yeah, Mason Cole is not as good as Jason Kelsey, and certainly Kenny Pickett is not built like Jalen Hurts.
Mason Cole ain't as good as anybody.
Although I will say the interior was pretty good against Aaron Donald yesterday.
Was better. Well, it was weird. Kenny Pickett, a couple times, as he is wont to do, escaped to trouble, but only a couple times. And there were times when Aaron Donald was real close to him, where he just kept his head and did what was sensible, even if it was throw it away.
Yeah.
Kenny Pickett, as much as anybody, as much as the interior line even, didn't let Aaron Donald be a factor.
Yeah, there was one play where Donald was really closing in on him, and Pickett, it was an incompletion, but most of the action of whatever pattern they called went to the outside. There's very few people between the numbers. I think he had a tight end kind of on a cross of some sort, and he said, okay, I'm going to stand in here, and if I get it to him, great, and if I miss him, so what? There's nobody in the middle of the field. And he took the hit from Donald. And that incompletion was refreshing because he didn't try to escape and make it worse and turn it into a sack.
I'll tell you what about Aaron Donald, Tim. Remember when he talked about retiring after they won the Super Bowl?
Yeah.
Well, Chuck Noll often said, if you're thinking about retirement, you already are, which might apply to me. And Aaron Donald's played good since then, obviously. But there are days when I wonder how much he still likes it. And yesterday was kind of one of those days.
Yeah, he was on the sidelines more often than I remember him being. Like, there were a lot of shots of TJ Watt and Aaron Donald on the sidelines yesterday. The commentators kept bringing it up, too.
I think they're both really beat up at this stage of their careers.
Last one that we'll get to here from Calvin. Why doesn't Kenny run for more yards? He always runs out of the pocket, but never takes a run for positive yards. I know that Matt Williamson brought this up on your show. He brought it up with me during the pregame show as well. That's one area that can get better for Pickett is his scramble rate. I
don't think he knows how to do it.
Do you think it's also maybe he's concussion leery after last year?
No, I just don't think he knows how to do it. Like we often say, he escapes to trouble. When you leave the pocket into a bigger area of traffic, that doesn't get you many rushing yards. And that's like the guys who know how to do it. I'll give you an example. Like Lamar, right?
Uh-huh.
Lamar will scramble, and he'll get out of the pocket, and all of a sudden the Red Sea is parted in front of him. You can't believe how much space there is, right? How's that happen? Well, because he knows how to do it.
There was one more I wanted to get to. Jeremy wants to know how Clipper is doing. We haven't seen Clipper for a while.
Well, she doesn't wander close enough for me to yank her up on camera very often, as we've seen. The only thing I could do, and it's not worth the trouble, is like put her food dish on the table here where I do this. And then she would jump up and I could grab her. She's all right. I worry that she's a little heavy. Wonder where she gets that from. And she has like a sneezy thing, but like I want to take her to the vet. And you can't get her in the cage because she's like the devil. She's like the little girl in The Exorcist when you try that. And the vet said, okay, here's some tranquilizers. Give her these. So I go, okay, I'll test them first, right? Tim, if that tranquilizer is in the food, she will not eat it. She figures it out, will not eat it. She looks at me like I'm the biggest jerk ever.
See, I thought when you said you were going to test it out, you took the tranquilizers yourself to make sure that they work.
I did that too.
Okay.
Tim, I know, like when I worked in WCW, yeah. there was an executive. I'm serious about this. I don't know if it was this particular drug. There's an executive there, a high muckety-muck Turner, who took cat tranquilizers. Seriously, he was out on the town with the boys one night because that's what the execs like to do is pretend.
Uh-huh.
And he offered one of the boys this pill, and they go, what is it? And he goes, it's a cat tranquilizer. And the guy says, I think I'll pass.
Madden and Benz Unfiltered. Maybe Mark will be on tranquilizers today for his show.
Where else can you get a story like that, Tim? Seriously.
Madden and Benz Unfiltered every Monday, 9:30 here at the Trib Live Facebook stream.